Hey, welcome into the Marketer's Best Friend. I'm your host, Cameron Warren, and today we're talking to John Westover. John is a marketing ops expert. He comes from a long resume. Let me just read this off for you because I want to break this down. Marketing automation, and John, you can correct me if I'm wrong as I go through this. Marketing automation manager at Verisk, manager marketing ops at InMoment, senior manager marketing ops at Concord, and now is the co-founder of your own shop, Voltage Marketing. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. You hit it on the nail on the head.
Well, John, that is, first of all, welcome to the show. Thank you so much. You're joining us on our inaugural episode.
Yeah. I'm excited to be here.
We're excited to have somebody of your caliber. I mean, you've been in marketing. How many years have you been doing marketing operations?
Oh man, it's been close to 7 years now. Just yeah. So I mean, that's been covering a little bit of what you just described. I started out as an intern at Verisk Analytics, and I did a bunch of different things, but that's where I started my journey in marketing operations using Eloqua, and then was there for a couple of years, and then I went to InMoment, which was a really different animal, smaller company, and that 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 basically they were using also a different software. They were using
Yeah.
Marketo as opposed to Eloqua, and so yeah, I mean it's been a long ride. So I was at InMoment for a little while, then I went to Series B startup using Marketo again, and now here I am doing my own consulting.
Man, that's I mean, so I remember Sam and I, Sam, CEO of DataJoin. I just rejoined Sam here at DataJoin as head of product, and we had lunch with you a couple weeks back, and I was thinking back to our time when we came over to InMoment. We were talking to you about some of the stuff we were doing. This was like 4 years ago. I
Uh-huh.
guess, I mean, one thing I've been thinking about is what's changed in terms of your perspective on marketing ops, marketing analytics, and tech since the time that we came in and met with you, because I feel like the landscape has dramatically changed. So what are the biggest changes that kind of you've seen that you've gone through?
Yeah. Well, I'd say everything really. So what?
Everything, just everything.
Yeah, I mean that covers everything. But like, I mean, getting more into the specifics of the
Yeah.
question. So back when back when you and Sam were there, it was really interesting because I was at InMoment and we were really trying to solve for attribution back then, and we were like, I remember Devin, my manager, he was so focused on it, and I was new to Marketo, and you guys had a system you were trying to do. So, anyways, I was just like trying to comprehend. Like, I'd heard about this mythical animal called attribution that has been talked about by vendors, all Martech vendors, for the longest period of time. And so, anyways, my perspective back then was like, man, we really got to be able to prove how well we're doing with all of our our activities that we're doing in marketing. And I just, it was like the singular focus back then. But since then, a lot of things have happened where, um, not to say that attribution is something that should be entirely forgotten, but, I've realized and learned that if you focus too much on attribution, then it's the biggest danger is you're going to lose you can lose your way and get too focused on attribution and you forget to actually be doing marketing, which is what marketers should be doing. So it doesn't matter if you have attribution if you don't have good marketing that's going into that. So and I realized I learned that a little bit at an moment, but really I learned that a lot when I was at Concord, which was the Series B startup that I was at after InMoment.
Interesting. So attribution, I mean, attribution kind of, to me, it feels like the golden goose. Like everybody wants it, but like nobody knows what it actually is going to do for them.
Yeah,
Maybe go into your experience at like what happened at Concord.
I spent a long time trying to like just learn the system. And then when I learned the system, like, hey, here's all the problems that are going on with it. Here's what needs to be fixed. I mean, I spent, it was from November all the way till March, that to like March, April, that I was trying to just understand this animal and figure out what it is that we needed to do. And there were a couple of other things that happened during that same period of time. Like we were changing our go-to-market strategy. We were adding on a self-serve component to it as well. And so, anyways, I spent so much time trying to figure out the systems because there was not a lot of documentation, and trying to tell people how good or not good the data was. And then once we figured out where we were trying to come up with a plan of how to execute and change the system so that it actually was telling us something that was meaningful and that the data was actually good. Like, we just spent so much time doing that we didn't put enough attention into our new go-to-market strategy
Yeah.
of helping people actually self-serve.
Right.
And come fast forward to August of that year. I started in November, and then August, just a couple of months later, I like the whole marketing team, everybody came together as a company, and we're like, hey, like, the business isn't doing good. Like, why? Um, and a lot of that blame and responsibility actually fell on the marketing team. We were so busy trying to focus on this data and this structure of all these data points that we didn't do a good enough job of actually doing what marketers are supposed to be doing, which, like I said, was marketing. And that was where I realized, like, you cannot spend so much time working on attribution. Like, it's just going to be a huge time suck that's not going to pay dividends in the end.
So, I mean, that's interesting. It sounds like you got so caught up in the weeds of trying to get the technology to work correctly that it just wasted the marketing team's time.
It did. Yeah. I was going down. I mean, there's actually a lot of challenges that were there. But
Yeah.
one of the mistakes that just I made specifically was like trying to chase this like perfect attribution component. That was like the driver. Like, I was trying to figure out the systems, but I also was like trying to make sure the data was good for the digital team that was trying to get leads coming in, and for the sales team. And so, I ended up focusing a lot of time on things that ended up wasting a lot of time.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's your approach now? I mean, you've obviously changed it. You're still in marketing ops, and you still are helping companies with marketing ops. So you're still in this
Yeah.
technology position, which, when you think about it practically, it's like, oh, you're supposed to come in and, connect all these systems and make them all communicate and work together. Now that you've been through that experience, how has that changed your actual like practical approach? For example, with your clients with voltage and
So one of the biggest lessons I learned there, in tandem with, not trying to focus solely too much on trying to get this perfect attribution model, was that it's not, you can't just jump solely straight into technology to solve your problems. You need to
yeah,
actually zoom out, and you need to have you need to have a good plan in place before. And when I'm talking about plan, you need to have, like, what is your overall go to market strategy goal that you're trying to accomplish? And then that's after that document, you also need to start defining some of the processes that are going to back up the tactics that you're going to deploy in
yep,
your go to market strategy. If you don't know what you're trying to do as a company, and like what targets you're trying to reach, and you don't have any processes defined, when you get to the tool, you're just going to be doing some best practice things that might be okay, but it's going to end up causing a lot of roadblocks for you further on down the road. You're going to have a lot of technical debt. So with clients that I work with, when I'm trying to help solve their problems, I try to zoom out and actually be like, okay, let's actually think about this from a business perspective before we jump into the tools.
yeah. So taking like, I mean, it sounds intuitive, yet, I mean, I know from speaking with you and speaking with many others, it just doesn't happen very often. Why do you think that is? I mean, because you think intuitively, you're
Almost
sitting
never.
there, you're sitting there thinking to yourself, oh, yeah, there's somebody who's orchestrating a strategy, a go-to-market strategy where you have a specific set of
Yeah.
tactics that you're going to go after. And then, okay, now we're going to take technology and apply that to a specific set of tactics. But like you just said, almost never happens. Why is that?
Lack of communication, and a couple of things. Lack of communication is huge. I've seen that with a lot of my clients. They're
Yep.
not talking to their other counterparts. So the
Okay.
communication from the top down
So communication is a big reason why this never ends up getting implemented correctly. And then lack of understanding. I'd say the second reason why this never happens is the lack of understanding what marketing operations actually does.
Okay.
And that's the lack of understanding within the marketing operations professional. I don't think that marketing operations professionals do a good enough job of understanding how the technology that they're using impacts the business as a whole. But then at the higher level, like from the leader's perspective, I don't think leaders really understand what impacts marketing operations has on the business and how they should use it to get the clear insights that they need, or to act on the strategy and the goals that the company has.
So how would you personally define that? I mean, because I've been, since I've started at DataJoin, and I've been talking to people like yourself and talking to tons of marketers, you can't really zero in on what is marketing. Like, what is marketing ops? Because I've heard it been described. Some people say, "Oh, marketing ops is like the IT of marketing," which you'd probably take offense to that. I would
actually.
I would imagine. No. And listen, I'm not saying this. This is what I heard from somebody, and then other people are like, "Oh no, well, actually, marketing ops needs to be positioned more strategically," which makes sense.
Yeah.
What is it? Like, can you define what is the value? The intrinsic value that marketing ops brings to the table that companies can't do without that function.
Because it's not easy. It's not easy to define it, but I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and I think about a business in general. Like, I start with there, and I'm like, okay, what's a business trying to do?
Yep.
We all know it's trying to make a profit, right? So how, like, every job in that company is trying to help that company make money in some way. It all feeds into there, whether it's direct or indirect. Sales is obviously the most direct to bringing in revenue.
Right.
So I think about marketing operations and I'm like, okay, how does marketing operations and MarTech fit into the mix? And the way that I think about it is it's marketing operations is really your how you're going to execute your marketing tactics. And when I say marketing operations, I think this is actually also another misunderstanding is when people talk about marketing operations, sometimes they instantly think Marketo or they think HubSpot.
Right.
Think tool. When that's not really all of marketing operations. In fact, that's a very small part of it. That's the marketing automation tool, but that's not marketing operations in general.
Yeah.
So, you've got marketing operations, which is it's how you are executing your strategies and tactics, and your strategies and tactics should be geared towards helping bring in people and nurture people that are already in along that sales cycle to bring you closer to revenue. So if you have a self-serve function, then you're helping them on their journey to sell themselves. If you don't, then you're helping them along that journey so that they can become educated enough and be like, hey, I'm ready to talk to sales. And also, like, in tandem with that, I actually think marketing operations now has a bigger role than it previously did because of the way that buyers buy now.
Yeah.
So, you're the how to these marketing tactics, but you're also you're the delivery system of education. You're creating these you're helping deliver and orchestrate these educational experiences that people are wanting to do on their own without sales. More and more and more, like, people have heard that ever since I started in marketing, but it's even more prevalent today. Like, by the time they want to talk to sales, they've narrowed you down to like 2 or 3 vendors. So I actually think, in a way, your marketing operations team and like what it is and how it helps you is like, it's how you do your marketing, but also it's kind of taking on a lot of those things that sales previously did before. Like, it has like a high enablement of a sales function, which I don't think that most marketing operation people would tell you that, because I don't think many of them have thought about it in that way. Maybe they have, but I think that's more of a relatively newer way of thinking about things. But
That's actually really interesting, thinking about, like a BDR or like a sales sequence, how much of a boon that could provide like a sales team, the marketing ops. I mean, I guess you also have that term revenue ops, which those get kind of combined together. But yeah, because typically you see that as like, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
that's a whole nother animal.
Maybe I shouldn't have brought up revenue ops as a different. Yeah.
Like, hey, great idea, but like, how's the execution of it? If you're in sales, you probably love it, but if you're marketing, you probably hate it, just because of how usually that's executed on.
So, what can companies actually do, like practically, right? If you're on a marketing team right now, and you're going to go back to your job tomorrow, and you're kind of having the same problems that you had, maybe at Concord, like you described, or the marketing ops function is, seen kind of as this IT function, and all you do is, maybe hook up systems, or, hey, can you go set up a sequence? How do you get marketing? Like, what should somebody go do? What are steps that they can take tomorrow to kind of start increasing value? Go ahead.
If you're in a marketing operations role,
if you're in a marketing operations role, or you're in a marketing organization where you understand the value of ops and you're trying to upgrade it, like, what are some practical things that they can do?
Yeah. Well, I think if you have a pretty good understanding of it and you know that you need to bring other people with you, start scheduling some meetings. Just really start talking to people, I think is a huge one. Start understanding other people on your team. Because it's great. Like, it's funny, but man, sometimes it just feels so hard to set a meeting and to talk to someone, because you're like, you look at your calendar, you're like, great, I have no meetings today. Like, this is going to be an easy day. But I've found that like you're not going to get anywhere if you don't talk to people. That's step one. You need to build relationships with others. You have no possibility of influencing anyone else if they don't know who you are. There's no shot. So schedule that time. And if you're in a marketing operations role and your leaders don't really understand what you do, then it's your job to try to help them understand that. And what you can do to do that is, if it's your direct manager, you can start talking about that in your one-on-one. You can start talking about how you view marketing operations and where you think the company needs to change in your respective sphere. And then aside from that, like, you need to go a step above it. Like, your CMO needs to understand what marketing operations does. And there's a lot of CMOs that are out there today that have no clue.
Right.
And so in order to help them, my last manager at Concord, he actually did help me to start doing this and made me realize this was big. It's like, send out a weekly update to the executive team. Make it brief. They don't want to read a ton of things, but let them know what's coming, and then send them updates about what it is that you're doing. And in those updates, like, try to position marketing operations in a way that you understand it, and they need to understand it, because that's the only way they're going to learn. They're not going to learn on their own. It's up to you to try to educate them. And then I think in tandem with those weekly updates, also set a standing meeting. Have a week or a monthly meeting with the CMO at a minimum, where you're talking to the CMO about what it is that you're doing and the impact that it's having on the organization as a whole, and how it's helping that CMO accomplish the goals that they have for their department.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, coming from a marketing analytics perspective, which is my background, right? I think one of the things that's in the same realm of what you're talking about with marketing ops is that the CMO, like, you make the assumption that the CMO sees value in the same way that you do sometimes, right? So I remember at a meeting once, we were helping Adobe. They were a huge client. We were going in and doing analytics, and we were tying data from Salesforce into Adobe Analytics and merging up Clickstream and kind of showing, oh, here's all the touch points across your campaigns. And we went in, and it was a meeting with not the CMO, but it was like the senior VP of communications. And we walked through the deck, and our client, who is director of social media there, was like, "Oh, this is a slam dunk, guys. You nailed it." And then we got to the end of the meeting, like she asked this question, like, "Oh, do you guys need to do anything with the net promoter score?" And I was like, "Huh? I'm not sure." And so it's just completely out of left field. I mean, since then I've learned like, oh, okay, she's worried about, she's thinking about the branding and the communications piece, but she just didn't see the value. She didn't recognize the value in the same way that this person did. And they hired us to come do work, but so important to communicate and set those expectations, I think, right? Like get that meeting with the CMO, talk through like, hey, this is how I'm seeing value. Are you seeing value the same way? And then defining those parameters.
As you were talking, it came to me like, and I don't know if it maybe came across the right way beforehand, but I think the prerequisite, like you want them to understand what you're doing, but like when you first have those meetings and when you talk to everybody, CMO included, like first understand them and their view of life.
Yeah. Great point.
And I think that when you understand them and their view of life, then and their workplace, that is going to help you be aligned to know what type of things you should present to them and in a way that they would understand and resonate with them.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, you can't just go execute and hope that and believe like, oh, I'm executing and I'm seeing these wins and then go show them, because they might look at those wins as like, I don't.
Who cares?
Who cares?
Yeah.
Let's talk about data for a couple minutes. Marketing ops and data. So one of the things that we're doing at DataJoin is we're taking this concept of integration automation and trying to really distill it down to its essence, like try to make it as simple as possible, right? If you look at two systems, let's just say, one of the ones we do is Adobe Analytics and Marketo, right? Just looking at that, those are just two pieces of a much larger stack. And just saying, hey, what if you could just do one thing, right? You could just take some behavior out of Adobe and you could activate on it in your marketing automation tool. I mean, that's something that we're trying to do, and that's kind of way we're looking at it. What are out in the wild in terms of when you're working with marketing ops? How are you thinking about data and analytics, and how does that like synergizing with what you're doing from a marketing ops perspective? What are you seeing as the challenges of leveraging data? I mean, because there's this idea of being data-driven, right? It's the data-driven marketer and data-driven marketing and blah, 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 blah. And we've been talking about this for 10 years, but it seems to reach different conclusions everywhere. So I'm curious, where do you see data and like being a data-driven marketer, where do you see that sitting in today's landscape? What are the biggest challenges that still remain in that space?
Yeah. I mean, I've never come into an org and where they tell me our data is awesome.
Yeah.
I have never. And it's interesting because when I've come into the different orgs that I've come into, like they're all at varying stages. Like some are actually what I would deem pretty good, even though the people there say that it's not pretty good.
Yeah.
But I think that right there plagues a lot of marketing operation professionals today, or just marketers in general, when they're trying to operationalize off of data, or I guess saying it in a more simple way, like act on the data and market based off of the data that they have. So data integrity is like a huge obstacle. And there's a lot of reasons why. I could talk about a lot of the reasons that I've seen as to why those challenges have come up. But it's a huge hurdle, I think, that companies have to overcome to feel confident enough to be able to actually leverage their data to create good experiences.
Yeah.
And I think it probably prevents a lot of people. I know for myself, that's prevented me, is just like my I've been so focused on trying to get even just the basics put in place, making sure that all of my properties on the different objects is good. And then I haven't even tried to dive into the activity. I've been distracted by these other things that just aren't in place yet.
So you're saying you're going in and you're basically never seeing data that's clean enough where these organizations feel confident that they could even go and do some of the lofty activities like personalization and activation. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, and because personalization, sure, I see companies like put a first name on there or something like
Yeah.
that. But have I seen it executed really well where companies are able to be like, hey, we have this audience, and within this audience, we're going to actually personalize the messages based off of the different areas of our product that they were interested in. I haven't seen that actually executed, and I think the reason is just because the confidence hasn't really been there in that data.
Data confidence, data integrity. When you go into these organizations, who is typically responsible for owning that conversation? Is that marketing operations, or is that somebody else, or is it fragmented across the different places you've worked at?
Fragmented. Yeah, it's usually lived like it's funny. It's almost like everybody says everybody points to it as like, oh, this is our ugly baby. Everybody points to it, but then and maybe this is actually one of the challenges is that everybody points to it as being an issue. But as far as ownership of it goes, there's like I hear less of like, oh, and it's this person, like it's my fault, or like, people saying, hey, this is why, and all these types of reasons. And more often than not, there's a lot of reasons as to why the data isn't working. And I think, and this is going to be, kind of circling back to what we talked about a little bit earlier, but I think at its base level, the reason why a lot of the data is not good is because you have a couple of different owners of it.
Yep.
Marketing, sales ops, let's just call it that for simplicity. You've got marketers, sales ops, and then customer success. Somebody over there, usually relying on the sales ops person.
Right.
You've got these processes that sit across different departments, and the processes may have been set up, but there was no oversight. Like nobody was checking to make sure that those processes were followed through on.
Yeah.
And if the processes weren't set up, then then you just have customer success, sales doing their own thing, not following any processes. And you need them to follow a process in order for that data to be accurate. So anyways, processes, like just lack of communication and lack of a system to be able to follow up and make sure that those processes are being kept and followed.
So for clean data, obviously, you talked about it earlier in the show where you were talking about starting with a strategy and then the process layer and then applying the technological data layer on top of that.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the reasons why I actually go back to that. And I like that as well, because it provides a level of documentation that is going to be there. So it's easier to do a handoff when people change, because inevitably people are going to be changing roles. You're going to start with this awesome dream, and then the Salesforce admin's going to leave, and then the marketing person's going to leave, just as they do. And then some of these things get missed. But like if you're communicating, everybody's kind of in on this. They know what the strategy is, and then the individual leaders know what the process is, and it's documented. Then it's going to help you have that continuity as you have people that are leaving. And then it also helps you guide you when you're building within the tool, so you don't get distracted by a million different options.
John, one more question for you, and then we'll close up the show here. But I'm curious of this challenge of having all these different processes, and then you have marketing ops, and then you have kind of the broader marketing organization, and then adding in the technological complexity layer on top of that. What do you see as the best way to help? The way I look at it is marketers over the years have almost lost control of their data in many ways. Like they've lost the power to kind of do what they want, or they can, and a lot of times, but you kind of have to go and ask permission. There's so many layers in between. I remember back in 2012, I interned at a digital advertising agency. This was like the height of digital agencies where they just own the universe. Now they've kind of lost their luster a little bit. The marketers could get any data that they wanted, and they really owned the systems and maybe it wasn't as interconnected and they didn't, worry so much about, like the whole personalization and like perfect omni-channel sequencing all the time, but they're definitely data driven and they had control over their data. Is there a way for marketers to get back to that? Like, is there a path? What do you think?
That's a great question. You're talking about like how marketers used to have access to all this activity data, but now with all the privacy rules, it's like pretty much disappearing. Like you don't have
that
near
that not only that, but now you're kind of dumping everything in maybe dumping everything in a CDP, or you're putting it in some kind of like middleware tool, and then you're adding a piece of tech on top of that that's going to give you measurement. Where I mean, a lot of this was like many years ago, but a lot of the work back in the day was it was less automated, but they kind of still had control over their data. They were just able, if they wanted to do something simple, they could do it. I
don't know if I'm the best person to be able to talk about that, because honestly, I can always speak of my own experience of what I've seen. It almost feels like the landscape for marketers, the technology grew so fast and the maturity of the actual implementation of the technology never actually caught up to that. and so you had like these now we can do so we have attribution, now we can do multi-touch attribution, now we can do predictive, we can predict who's going to come be a customer for you,
right?
Now we like all these different layers of technology that I like. So there's all these tools and capabilities that have come out there, and I just feel like the maturity just never caught up to it. And at least for me, like even I have yet to have gotten to a place where I was able to get it to a point where it's like, okay, cool, finally we are here. We have a good system. We have like this base framework in place. We know who's a customer. We know where everybody's at in their relationship with us. Let's do this. Like, let's freaking kick off the jet engines and like, let's create tracks where we can actually help educate our customers where they are in that particular point, and to reach out to them with their specific, the specific product that they're interested in. It just seems like, at least from my own personal experience, I've never actually been able to get there. So and getting back to your original question, I don't know if I necessarily answered it. Can marketers get back to take control of their data? I mean, I haven't.
I mean,
control.
You say you're not qualified, but I think that's an incredible answer. I mean, it is interesting to hear you say, that vision that you just painted. That I think that's the vision that kind of every B2B marketer has in their mind. This is where we should be, but in terms of like, the proof is in the pudding. Very rarely, almost never, do you see that is actually the case.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. It's so easy to like get on a podcast like this and to talk about ideal states, or go to conferences and talk about ideal states. And frankly, dude, it's actually crazy. When I started going to conferences when I was earlier on in my career, I went to these conferences. I'm like, whoa, these guys are crazy. Like, they're actually able to do that. Oh, this is awesome.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring this back to my sales team. I'm going to tell them that I'm going to be able to predict who their next closed won deal is going to be. Like,
yes,
because that was the type of stuff that I was hearing at these conferences.
Right.
And then I got to a point where I was thinking in my head, I was like, man, I must not be very good at this, because what they're talking about here at these conferences and what the vendors telling me, like when I go and read on their website, I am not there. I'm not even close to there. So, and like, granted, I was still young. I don't know if I was giving myself enough credit, but like, it got to that point where I was like, man, maybe I suck at this. So.
I mean, well, look, I mean, to put it, there's a light in this conversation, because I think it's, people who listen to this who work in marketing or work in marketing ops, which I hope they will, and hear from somebody who has such a vast experience in this field, to say that out loud and to make that statement, I think it's actually freeing in so many ways, because to your point earlier in the episode, it's like, look, now we can just focus in on, here's like the activities that actually matter. Let's just focus in on simple base hit wins instead of getting lost in the technology. So, I mean, you're seeing it as this sort of disillusionment, but in a way, the disillusionment leads to the realization that, okay, well, let's kind of narrow our scope. Let's focus in on the things that we can control. Let's try and get some base hits before we get a grand slam, right?
100%. Yeah, you're not going to get the grand slam if you don't get your base hits. Never. Unless you're extremely lucky.
Well, John, this has been an awesome conversation. If you notice some technical difficulties listening to this episode, I apologize for that. Episode 1, we'll get those smoothed out in future episodes. John, thanks for being a trooper and dealing with those hiccups. John, thank you so much. We will get your contact info and stuff listed in the podcast description of this episode. You can find more episodes of The Marketer's Best Friend weekly, where we're talking to experts in B2B technology and analytics, the best friends of marketing, getting next day insights from them to learn how marketers can make their lives easier, make their lives better through technology, through analytics, and through data. Thank you so much for listening, and have a great day.
Yeah.